You are welcome to yet another episode of LFN What's Your Say? The leading listening show, where we discuss real issues with real people like you. We are still featuring R. Kelly. And today we are discussing how the mob managed to demonize the R&B king, denying him a chance to the possibility of freedom. If you carefully analyze the way innocence is determined in the 21st century, you will quickly notice a strong correlation between the current system and religion. It's no longer about whether or not someone can prove that you actually broke the law, but more about how charismatic you are, and how passionate the group you represent will be about your story. A close look at most Bible stories could easily justify mob justice as an acceptable system. But it is important to note that this can end up legitimizing a lot of wrongdoing. This is actually the way Jesus got killed, when the crowd chose Barnabas to be released, and Jesus of Nazareth to be crucified. In the end though, we have lived to remember this day, largely because it turns out Jesus was actually the innocent one that deserved not to die. If only the justice system then had not based on how charismatic the crowd was about killing the Messiah, and eventually releasing the criminal instead, it's possible that Good Friday would not be a very sad memory after all. The story of Jesus and the prostitute also nearly justified her elimination by the crowd. If only Jesus had not intervened, the charismatics were determined to stone her to death. And finally, the story of David and Goliath saw large numbers sing songs of hail, saying Saul had killed thousands, and David tens of thousands. And simply because of that, David was regarded the chosen one, simply because he was more effective at war. It's therefore not strange to see politics at the center of behavioral enforcement, and democracy at the forefront of social justice, as was the case in the R. Kelly legal woes. We are living in an era where the majority win in everything, irrespective of how right or wrong they may be. If we learn later that the majority were actually wrong, it's simply another story to be aired on the History Channel for our descendants to learn from. R. Kelly did not have to be beaten to the ground in order to become a victim of mob justice. For as long as the world rises against you and categorizes you as a social misfit, you are likely to be stoned to death like the prostitute that Jesus rescued from the angry crowd. R. Kelly is currently being stoned to death. Do you catch my drift? And who knows? Perhaps if we were still living in the Old Testament, Jesus would show up and tell the world to stop. I believe in so many things, but one thing I do not believe in for sure is the social judgment of numbers. There is no way fair social justice can be upheld in a game of numbers, and innocence determined by who is able to throw the most charismatic tantrums at the other. It's probably the reason people will now take to the streets with banners and graffiti whenever a big case is running. An example is the Britney Spears conservator case against her dad. If people must take to the streets to get justice, politicians and social media bloggers are going to replace our esteemed lawyers. One may need to hire these guys that have got the numbers from their large followings, as part of their defense teams to legitimize their actions going forward. Especially now that the lawyers are being threatened by the mob with promises of hellfire, as was the case for the Harvey Weinstein lady attorney, who claims to have received a note telling her the gates of hell were wide open for her to go check in. Simply because she was defending a man who everyone had already deemed a predator by social default. The definition of a David, as presented in the Bible, is that small weak individual with a huge social following, that was able to defeat the giant Goliath, who represents the rich, famous, and powerful, that everyone hated and called evil. But why was he exactly called evil, one may ask? Only because he fought for what he believed in that many did not. Try Googling it. You will likely get the same result. However, the Me Too movement at that time suggested Goliath was evil and deserved to be killed anyway. I guess if this story was to be relieved in the current times, Goliath, the offender, would get 100 years to life for going against the larger crowd. And small David, the victim, would take to the media as the hero of the day for sending such a large man to prison for his belief. I see the world quickly returning to the historical system that believed, if you didn't have the numbers rallying behind you, you were evil. And if you had the numbers, you were holy. A system that was eventually proven wrong in the stories that followed. R. Kelly was completely dehumanized by social media propaganda, and the charismatic groups that took to the streets to mute him. Once those that had the following decided to take this path, and the majority rose against him, R. Kelly was literally left with no chance. It's probably because he knew this, that he did not even bother to make a final plea at the end of his trial. He probably had read his Bible well, and realized that it will take a second coming for him to prove that he is indeed a child of God. According to Jasmine, for sure the world has resorted to believing propaganda rather than looking out for the facts. R. Kelly became a victim of this. I hope we won't have to look back in history years later, and regret the throwing of stones. I don't think the world is simply returning to this kind of approach to justice. I think it has always been this way, we are simply failing to adjust to what the laws actually require of us, and as a result, sentiment still determines the way we look at matters despite how sensitive they may be. The very Bible, which I imagine Christians believe in as the Book of Wisdom, has clearly described crowds that throw stones at assumed sinners as agents of evil, and those that are stoned as the true believers to whom he came to give compassion and grant freedom. And this is evident almost in every single Bible story. Surprisingly though, you find the same people that never miss Sunday service taking the forefront in this stoning business. It's a shame. According to Daisy, there is always a 90% chance that matters handled in this nature eventually turn around victimizing the accused. The only problem is that this may take decades. An example of this is the way the LGBT community, for years, had to live undercover to avoid the possibility of being stoned to death, but decades later, society now clearly knows that it had always been wrong to do this. Sadly, the change happened at a time when those responsible for the stigma are long gone. Perhaps this time round, the Messiah will come down quickly and save Kelly from the wrath of this stoning crowd, so that he does not have to go through the long suffering the world thinks he deserves. Ashley says, it's not just in relation with the Baal stories, but even in the normal life we know of, it's common that when many people team up to pin a single individual, that person is usually the victim in the end. In normal circumstances, if someone is actually evil, it shouldn't necessitate an entire football team of 11 to prove this. And if this is the case, chances are that the decisions made against that person will eventually be overturned, and the person reinstated to holiness by the blood of Jesus. With all this said, we believe it's a matter of time and R. Kelly will be back in victory, in the Lord's name. If you wish to take part in a live interview discussing any of these topics, let us know by sending an email to sashalfnmedia@gmail.com for scheduling. Thank you for watching today's video, a production of LFN Media, giving you another perspective of issues at hand. We make it our business to keep you updated with the truth amidst the cloud of lies the media wants you to believe. It is therefore important to subscribe to this channel, hit the bell icon and allow all notifications so that you don't miss out whenever we publish a new video.